All right, and welcome back to the Breaking Zone. You may have noticed we have a new home. We started a new channel specific to the podcast based on a lot of your feedback. 650 of you have already subscribed. That's super exciting.
Yeah.
If you find us not through the old Canyon Chasers website and you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing.
Yeah.
All right, so last weekend we were in Italy. Misano.
Yeah. What'd you think?
I thought it was there was a lot of crashes. I think everybody crashed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because Misano is fairly well known for being probably the grippiest surface track that there is, which you would think, oh, that should have the least amount of crashes. But it's almost the opposite because it's so grippy that you have to push so hard to be competitive with the other riders that by the time you're losing grip or losing traction, it's gone. There's no saving it. It's gone too fast. Whereas just the previous weekend in Barcelona, a notoriously not grippy track, not nearly as many crashes because I think people get a lot more warning or a lot more just slides in general that they're always dealing with that they can save more often. I mean, even Marquez about Catalunya, he had a few front end slides, but he was able to pick it back up in the race. But you saw in the sprint, as soon as the front went, when he passed Bez, there was no bringing it back. It was gone.
Yeah, he was gone. And then I think we really need to talk about Bez. And again, we keep saying this almost every other episode. He continues to impress. Did you get the reference? Did you get the wood leg reference?
Not at all. No, not at all. Not at all. That's an inside Italian joke.
I am embarrassed to say that I didn't get it until they said where it came from. And then I got it because I have actually seen Three Men and a Wooden Leg.
We've seen the movie.
Or at least chunks of it, yeah.
Is it in Italian?
It's in Italian. And I think it was when I was in the Army because it's a 90s movie.
Yeah.
That's where I remember seeing it, I think. I remember seeing parts of it. And it's basically, the plot of the movie is three guys have to transport this wooden leg that's a piece of art across Italy. And wackiness ensues. It's a comedy.
Yeah.
But the whole point of the movie is how we suffer greatly for things that are ultimately unimportant and have no value. And so kind of taking like Bez, I'm going to try to read between the lines with what I think Bez was trying to say, in that one of the things I love about MotoGP is that it kind of doesn't matter, right? That it's
racing at the end of the day.
It's racing at the end of the day. Like it's not the end all be all.
Right.
I guess if you work in the industry, it is. But at the end of the day, it's just racing. And, you know, he's known for being unbelievably intelligent. He doesn't put up with stupid questions from journalists. And it seemed to me, if I'm reading into it as I think I am, that he's like, it's just racing, man. Like, I think that's kind of what he was trying to say. And then he works so hard for something that kind of doesn't really matter.
I love that insight.
Yeah, because I was like, what is it, Pinocchio? That was my first thought. It's like, this is about Pinocchio thing,
right?
Which is also Italian.
Yeah.
And then they said, oh, it's from this movie. And I'm like, holy crap, I've seen that movie, or at least parts of it. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. So the Italians are sort of notorious, Rossi, especially in his heyday, was notorious for sort of quirky celebrations and a lot of inside jokes that they didn't really care if you got it or not. It was their joke, not your joke. And they were fine with that. And I thought, I saw Bez do this wood leg thing. And I thought, oh, cool. That's still an Italian thing, is this sort of sense of humor of like, it's my joke. I don't care if you get it or not.
Yeah, and apparently, according to the commentators, is that he's been making jokes from the movie this entire season. And I also think that speaks to, he's created or helped create a team or garage atmosphere that is probably very positive. And I think we're seeing that in his performance, because I still don't think he's an alien, but I think what we're seeing with Bez is will over skill. He is trying so hard. He's pushing so hard. He's working so hard, and we're seeing the results of that, I think.
He was fantastic in the race. Normally, Mark let him lead for the first third of the race, just kind of Mark, followed him. Normally when Mark makes a pass, pulls out a second, 2 seconds, that's it. You just say goodbye. Bez did not.
Yeah, he didn't let go.
No, he's like a bulldog. He was just, nope, I'll either be in the gravel or I'm going to fight. And he fought. And it made what could have been a really boring race really exciting just because you kept seeing this yo-yo back and forth between the two of them. Yeah, thank God we have Vez in the championship.
Yeah, he made Marquez earn it. He made Marquez earn it, which was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Any other standouts from the weekend that you saw?
Well, again, Quartararo, and I think that dovetails us into the Yamaha. And you were right. I watched free practice 1. There were only 2. There's only 2 of the V4s, and don't crash it.
Yeah.
And then the commentators said that they are unlikely to give this bike to anybody else because of the aero package. And I'm gonna make a prediction that I think that might be bullshit, because the inline 4 is wider, the V4 is narrower. I'll bet you they could put that aero package on the V4, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if we see Quartararo on it in Japan.
I hope they do that. The other one I had read about was, and I hadn't thought about this, but they have to homologate their gear ratios at the beginning of the season. Talk about a nerdy rule. You have to homologate your gear ratios. So
It's easy to do.
Well, I think what their point was that their ones that Quartararo has homologated are for the inline 4, not for the V4. So potentially the V4 wants different gear ratios.
Yeah, you should be able to compensate for that with front and rear sprockets.
Even those, your final drive ratios are also.
Wait, what? You can't.
Don't you have? I think you've got like 3 options.
Wait. Oh, for each weekend.
No.
Jeez, this doesn't make any sense, because Qatar is a wildly different track than Budapest, right? You're not going to ride those 2 tracks the same.
But they don't. Typically, these teams, and World Superbike is similar, they don't actually change their final drive ratios much because it has such an impact on geometry. They'd rather change the internals because it doesn't affect the geometry of the bike. So that's now is it impossible for Yamaha to get around that or get it close enough to go testing? I don't think that is a good enough reason for them to not go testing with the thing. But I did read that the ratios may limit them on what they can do because those are homologated, and there is no change of the rules for concessions for gear ratios. Everyone has the same rules they have to follow for that. So now again, all of these I think can be overcome, just like you said with the aero package. So what if it's not the ideal aero package for the V4? You've got to figure this.
And you're putting your fastest rider on the new platform.
What are you waiting for?
Even if the gear ratios, and V4s are unbelievably flexible, strong engines, and perhaps it won't make that much of a difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's always an ideal, right? But I think all of these are, so what if it's not perfect? You've got to go, you've got bigger things. You got to decide if the frame is right. You got to decide if the engine's built right,
If the engine's in the frame and the right.
Yes, there's a lot of things they have to figure out
before you worrying about like final gear ratios on the cassette transmission.
Let's come back to the Yamaha. I've got more to.
I want to talk about the Yamaha more too. Yeah.
But I want to finish up on Misano. So one of the things that I thought was fascinating about Misano was the KTM's chain issue. KTM broke 3 chains during the race weekend, which is weird. MotoGP bikes do not break chains. You never see that happen. And so the question was, well, what's going on? How, is KTM falling apart on a mechanics level? How are they somehow not able to figure out how to keep a chain on a bike? So the other problem with Misano is they run it backward. It's not in the direction it was designed for, so they run it backwards. So a lot of these corners are crazy fast entrance speeds, and there's a lot of braking throughout the corner. So there's a series of right-hand corners on the track. That the first one that they enter is the fastest one, and it gets progressively tighter and tighter. Now, if you can imagine, if you ran that in the correct direction, if you ran it through a left, that would be one of the most fun series of corners to watch because they would progressively go faster and faster all the way through. Well, they have to go in so hard on these corners on such a high grip track that all the riders complain about how physical Misano is because the bike's bucking and it's fighting and there's so much grip and so much force. Okay, that's the track surface. Now think about all these bikes. They are constantly adjusting and designing these bikes to find more grip when the bike is leaned over. For example, if you go look at, spy photos that people grab when the manufacturers didn't want them to, of GP bikes, you'll see how thin the spars are from the engine hangers, how thin the frame is, how thin the swing arm is. All this stuff is designed to let the whole thing flex more and find more grip and more traction. Well, the problem is now you've got a flexy chassis that finds lots of grip on a surface that's got way too much grip. So what the teams do is they'll run the swing arm back as long as they can to try to have less grip actually on the rear to help the bike turn and not just hook up everywhere. But now you made the swing arm even longer, so it's more bow. It can bend more. That you're getting this issue where the forces that are going into the bike are flexing it so much that the chain line is getting so misaligned that the chain can pop off. And that's what I think happened to KTM, is their chassis and everything's getting so misaligned that it's popping off the chain on the rear sprocket and then breaking a chain link, which is a weird problem to have, that they're breaking chains because of that.
I actually have more insight into this because you are absolutely correct. What I read, another article they're doing, every other manufacturer put a little chain guide on the bottom of the rear sprocket to help maintain chain alignment, and as that flex happened, to guide the chain back onto the sprocket. Can you guess which manufacturer chose not to run that?
I bet I can guess which one.
Right. So again, it was a pretty unique thing. It is surprising to me that everybody else was doing it. Why did KTM choose not to, or just not think about it, or not notice it?
The other thing I thought with KTM is interesting. They're the only brand who runs a steel frame, not an aluminum frame.
Right. They're still doing their,
Which they should be able to still tune it and get flex out of it. But I wondered if some of the restrictions with the frame meant that they had to get more tuning, more flex out of their carbon swing arm than the other brands. So maybe their swing arm is actually more flexy than everybody else's, which gives them more of this misaligned issue. Then the last factor of this whole thing, which compounds all of it, is they all now, with these rear ride height devices, drop the rear end so much that these chains have to have a ton of slack in them. Because if you think about like the chain slack on a dirt bike, because the swing arm travels so far, the chain has to be really slack on it. So there's all these guides and stuff to keep the chain in place. They almost have that same issue on a GP bike now, because these swing arms and everything's so long and so much flex. So it's kind of a fascinating, weird problem to get. And it's a little embarrassing that KTM, who comes from dirt bikes, didn't think about it. So
what did you think of Acosta flipping off his motorcycle?
I think that's a 20-something kid who's frustrated, who's trying really hard and pushing hard. I mean, he was riding great.
He was riding great.
And fighting through the pack and coming closer, and then to have a mechanical. I don't condone it. I don't think he should do that, but I totally get where it's
It made me sad, if I'm going to be honest with you, because you're not just, obviously he was probably aware of what happened. Well, obviously he was aware. He knew the chain came off. He knew the chain broke. And when you flip off your motorcycle, you're not just flipping off the situation or the whatever. You're kind of in part flipping off your entire crew who worked so hard to put everything together, And I don't think he thought that in the moment. I don't think that's what he was intending, but that's how it reads, and it bummed me out.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. He's a kid. He is young, but it made me sad to see him do it.
I think that's a way to take it. And I think that is where the professionalism and maturity will come in over time. And he'll probably, as soon as he did it, as he was storming away, realize, I probably shouldn't have done that. I bet he knew as soon as he did it, he shouldn't have done it. I don't think that took a lot of reflection, but I just understand that, a 20-something in the heat of the moment, and a guy is passionate and is willing to put it on the line as he is. And he was having a great race. So I get just being mad. So yeah,
I'm certainly not going to hold it against him, nor do I think less of him.
Yeah.
It would be more of I hope it doesn't become a pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. The worst is when you see riders, and this has happened, I think John Hopkins did this when he was younger with Suzuki, got off the bike after a mechanical, and it was so frustrated, he started kicking the bike. I still remember the video of that. That's a pretty bad one.
Yeah, that's where, so it's worse. And again, I don't fall like you said, and these kids, and they are all of them, most of them are under 30.
Yep.
They're putting a lot on the line. They're all, and I think this is something else a lot of people don't realize, they're all riding injured in some degree or another. You think even a minor low side is still, you're bruised and you're stiff and you're sore and you probably tweaked something. and they're still going out there and just like riding at this level on some level of injury. And, you know, they're superheroes, for lack of a better word. And, you know, sometimes I think, you know, sitting here in the Canyon Chasers garage, we can be a little too critical.
Yeah.
And I try not to be, right? Because every one of these riders are spectacular. They're incredibly talented, skilled, you know, humans,
right? They're, you know, and just think about all of the things going on in your day-to-day life or things that I've got going on in my life that would impact my ability to push or ride at that level. They all have that same stuff going on. We just never hear about it because they, you know, they have drama with their dad. They've got an issue with a girlfriend. You can't just talk about that stuff all the time. But
yeah, I went for a mountain bike ride yesterday afternoon, and I have to hop over a rock on CMG. They rerouted the trail, so you have to go over that big rock.
Yep.
And I timed it a little bit wrong, so I yanked a little harder to get over it, and I swore I pulled a muscle in my thigh. Like, it felt like the worst Charlie horse in the world. I had to stop and get off the bicycle and walk around for a minute. And you know, like, this is just me riding a freaking bicycle down a pretty mellow trail, just getting it. And and it really made me think, like, when it was happening, you know, like, a lot of these guys, they go out there, they wad the bike, they run back to the pits to get their second motorcycle and go right back out. And who's capable of that?
yeah, and there's no chance that they're walking away totally unscathed all the time.
Right.
You know, to your point, all of these little injuries accumulate, and you know, you'll see some of them where they're in the pits and they'll pull their leathers off, and you'll see a bruise from his shoulder to his wrist, just black and blue or whatever, and he's just still riding. It's like anybody else would just be on the couch.
And the chemicals they can take are heavily monitored.
Yeah.
Right? Like, as I could be wrong, but it seems like I read that they really can't take much more than ibuprofen.
Yeah.
And
I mean, and frankly, they don't want to. You don't want to be out there being impaired. Not only is it risky, but you're just not going to go as fast. So,
all right. So back to the Yamaha. Let's talk about the Yamaha.
I want to hear your thoughts. So I want to spend a minute. I want to talk a little bit about why is Yamaha doing this in the first place.
Switching to the V4.
I'll share a little bit about it, but I want to hear what your thoughts were on so far, because there is a test as well today. I don't know if you're.
Yeah, I haven't paid any attention to the test today. Again, we're taping on Monday. When that thing first rolled out, I thought it may be the prettiest MotoGP bike we have seen in a long, long time. The way the aero is built into the fairings on the side, the overall design of that thing is really pretty. And I know that's not their goal, right? They're not trying to make a pretty motor.
Well, shouldn't it be?
But I did appreciate how well put together the thing looks. It's a doll. It is a pretty motorcycle. And then I always watch Free Practice One. It's my favorite free practice to watch, because that's kind of where you get the news and you get all the information, because nothing's really happening in Free Practice One. It's not super competitive. So they did, like, the camera guy just walked up to the Yamaha as they were warming the thing up, and the guy's just like, row, row, row. And you're like, oh, that sounds nice.
Yeah.
That does sound nice. So, yeah, like, I love V4s. I'm super excited to see Yamaha doing it. I thought it looked great. Apparently, it's thirsty, as you and I both know. As you get a V4, V4s really like to drink fuel, and I think they had issues with fuel. I think I read or saw something that one of the first tests they did with it, he went out for like 3 or 4 laps and the fuel light came on because it drinks a lot of fuel. So those are my initial thoughts with it so far.
And I think that the feeling thing, they'll get figured out. Sure. The same thing happened with Aprilia when they went to it. It's, you know, for a while, it's just going to be a little thirsty, and they'll get it dialed in. And I think that'll get better. I totally agree with you how pretty it is. I'm surprised you're saying that, though, because the V4 one was solid Yamaha blue. You were not a blue.
I'm not a blue guy. I'm not a blue guy, but you can still look at the shape and be like, you know, like, most of them, the arrow on the lower fairings just look kind of gangly and hanging out there, and they look kind of like a wart. And the way these, like, the panel was really flat and the arrow was kind of tucked in, you'd see the thing right away, and you'd see, like, the little fins on the inside of it, and you're like, there's a lot going on, I think, with this bike, that Yamaha might be taking it to the next step with this, or potentially they completely missed the mark. I don't know, but it look nice.
I wonder if a little bit the body looks better because there was no sponsorship branding at all.
Right.
It was literally solid blue panels, which sort of let you see the shape better. I wonder if the other brands gave you a solid red one or a solid,
Well, we do get
Would it
to
look
see those at the end of every season when they,
but they're in the matte black.
they're in the matte
which I think hides a little bit of the
Right.
shape too.
which is fair. And I always think they look absolutely spectacular when they're just like raw carbon fiber with a number on the front of them. They look great. Even though like we love the sponsorships, and that's part of like how many of you out there put a sponsorship sticker on your motorcycle even though you're not sponsored by anybody, right?
Yeah.
Like I like this brand, I'm going to put my own sponsor sticker on the side
Yeah.
because we want to look like our heroes, right?
I see an awful lot of Brembo stickers on bikes that I'm pretty sure aren't sponsored by Brembo. So yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I think it looked great. It looked way more polished than I expected for a prototype. It looked ready to go.
I would agree. Yeah.
But I think that, last week we talked about Yamaha wouldn't bring it out if they weren't ready to let the world see it. And I think a lot of bringing it out to a race event like they did here, it is, and it is kind of the show of force. It's like, look at how much we've done, because they're still, as weird as this sounds, they're kind of trying to woo Quartararo right now for his next contract signing. They're trying to convince him, look at all the good work we're doing. Look at how close we're getting. We're doing everything you asked. Please sign with us again. So I think a little bit they're trying to show, no, look at all the resources going into this and impress him with this bike. So they did. The GP riders, Quartararo and Miller, got to test the V4 today.
Oh, okay.
So Monday, so last night for us. Miller and generally had positive things to say. We're in the right direction. We've got some work to do, but there's some things here that are going to work. Quartararo was pretty lukewarm on the whole thing. And I wonder if to some extent that is Quartararo really isn't a great test rider and really can't see it for what it is. All he goes is, I'm slower than I was yesterday. This isn't better. Or if he's also playing a little hard to get. Like if I encourage Yamaha too much, will they slow down? So I don't know. I don't know what's going on there, but none of the comments I read from him were glowing by any stretch.
Interesting. Yeah, like again, his reputation of a test rider is that he doesn't always understand and he can't articulate what he's experiencing. Now that seems to have absolutely no bearing whatsoever on his ability as a rider.
Hell of a racer.
Right, hell of a racer. And I've said this about Maverick Vinales for years. I wonder if he would be better as a test rider than a racer because it seems like the pressure of racing gets to him. But he's absolutely, unequivocally a phenomenal rider who is pretty good at articulating what he wants. And we see that with how he's helped KTM so much this year. Everybody's following Maverick's
settings. Yep.
Right. So I'd be more interested, and I should go look it up, what Miller had to say, because Miller's been on every other V4.
Yeah.
And I think his insight, and this is why I was frustrated that Yamaha might not sign him. There's just so much knowledge there from Miller to be like, like he would be able to key in on, I think the motor might be in the wrong place. The firing order might be off, although I bet they're all running the same firing orders. So I don't know.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
So, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Miller's insights are going to be much more valuable right now than anybody else's. But they've got Dovi on the bike who rode Ducatis. I think they're going to head in the right direction.
And Dovi, from what I understand, is recognized as one of the greatest test riders. Dovi and Pedrosa are kind of seen as who you really want as a test rider.
Yeah, I think you'd be hard-pressed to say which KTM or Yamaha. For sure, KTM or Yamaha have the best test team. But you'd be hard-pressed to say which one's actually the better one, because Pedrosa and Dovi are both excellent, right? For feedback and stuff. I want to dive into a little bit about the V4 itself and why are they doing this. So if you're not following the technical side of MotoGP hyper closely, you might be a little confused to say, why does it matter? Why does an inline 4 matter versus a V4? So right now, everybody runs a V4 except Yamaha. Yamaha's ran an inline 4 for ages. Their inline four is a cross-plane crankshaft, just like the R1 is. So you do get a non-screamer firing order.
It emulates a V4.
Kind of emulates a V4 as close as it can, while staying somewhat balanced. So they're doing kind of as best as they can with the firing order they have to get that behavior of a big bang. But it can only go so far. It's never quite the same. But that said, why would they go to a V4? Well, there's a couple of reasons. In MotoGP, right now, the aerodynamics is such a massive factor in the behavior of the bike and the speed of the bike and everything else that is now taking a higher order precedence than other factors. So if you think of the frontal area of a bike, so imagine a bike coming straight at you. An inline four is going to be wider because all 4 cylinders in a row. V4 is literally half as wide, not wide, but ballpark half as wide. Lets them narrow up everything and give them more space for appendages, essentially, for the aero, right? All right, so there's that factor of it. The other factor of it is, now if you think about a bike in profile, so you're looking at it from the side, if I made the engine narrower in the front, I can also now drop the engine lower into the chassis and not have ground clearance issues as I lean left to right. What that does, if you think about the bike in profile, is now the whole engine inside the frame sits lower down. And we're not talking inches, but we could be talking up to an inch or more, right? It's not, falling on the ground, but it's pretty low. That gives them more flexibility with where the countershaft sprocket is. And with the Michelin tires, rear grip is such an important thing on these bikes. And typically, if you design a modern bike, the correct way, a slightly lower swing arm pivot is going to give you more traction on the rear tire. Well, you can only get so low with it if your countershaft sprocket is in a fixed height. So the countershaft sprocket also has to come down slightly to allow you to run a lower, flatter swing arm to get more grip. So in theory, they should get a little bit more grip. It's a little bit narrower, so the whole bike is a little bit more aerodynamic from the front. It also has a shorter, more compact crankshaft, which has a lower moment of inertia.
As it's turning from side to side, I imagine an inline 4 crank, right? Mm-hmm. It has to travel. You have all these spinning forces. And I want to think, just like I'm not the engineer, that there's going to all sorts of crazy stresses on a long crank, where if the crank is effectively half as long, I would think take less energy for it to get to turn from left to right, as opposed to the big long thing. Is that what we're talking about with moment of inertia?
Yeah, so moment of inertia is a fixed feature of any object, meaning the fact that it's spinning doesn't change its moment of inertia. It might change other inertias like gyroscopic forces, but the moment of inertia is literally just the geometry of the part and then the axis you're rotating.
This is why lighter wheels make such a big difference. It's not so much the unsprung or sprung mass, but it's moment of inertia because it takes less energy to spin them up, slow them down, and get them to change direction.
That's, yes. So somewhat to change the direction, correct. So if you think about moment of inertia is basically it's a measurement of the amount of effort it's going to take to rotate something. So if you take a cylinder, right, if you measure the axis of the cylinder and rotate it, it has a low moment of inertia, okay? Usually because if it's really tight around the axis. But now if you take a crankshaft, which is long, but you spin it from the center, so it's going the long way around, it has a very high moment of inertia. Now, in an engine, in a motorcycle, this thing's sitting in the bike and you're cranked over on the left side. It's very stable once it gets into position because of the moment of inertia, so it doesn't want to change rotation, doesn't want to rotate left to right. This is why the Yamaha M1 was always known for being this sweet handling bike, is because once it's leaned over, it feels very, very stable and smooth, and it kind of eats up imperfections and just feels really buttery smooth through a corner. Whereas an inline 4 with a much narrower crank, a V4, thank you, a V4 with a narrower crank, when it's leaned over, it's more likely to be upset by changes in input or track features, things like that. So it isn't going to feel as smooth and arcing and planted as an inline 4. The balance of that, though, is now the inline 4, because it's this narrow compact thing, can flick more easily left to right around its axis.
I mean the V4.
The V4. Sorry, I keep saying that wrong. V4.
Yeah.
The V4 crank is going to be shorter, so it's allowing it to flick left to right more easily. And that's I believe that's why they say, oh, it's a better bike for fighting with other bikes with, because it's more nimble. You can kind of juke into a corner late and still make it to the apex. You're not fighting this big long moment to get it through the corner. So there's all of these reasons why they're moving to this V4. Some of the reasons that I've heard people say, the only reason I wanted to go over that is I've heard some people say things about V4s that are just not actually true. It's like, that's not why they're actually.
Yeah, let's go over that, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding over V4s. They've been around in motorcycles forever. Honda basically brought them to market in the 80s with some of the greatest motorcycles. And then they're extremely expensive to make because you have to make two of everything. Aprilia kind of solved the problem by taking the front jug and basically rotating 180 degrees, putting it on the back. So you have two chains that are spinning. So they're complicated, they're expensive, they're more moving parts. From my perspective as primarily a street riding guy, I love V4s because they're charming to ride, but I've heard people say all sorts of things about V4s that even despite my affection for them, I'm like, I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Now, to that point, because imagine it's the V, right? The problem with the V4 is a packaging issue. Now I've got cylinders in the front, cylinders in the back, and I've got exhaust coming out both of them. And if you think about how packaged a motorcycle is, where the heck do you put all that stuff? And then the airbox is going to be smaller typically because it's compromised on shape as well. So there's a lot of reasons why V4 is a downside. And then from a production perspective, yeah, it's more expensive, right? It's now instead of 2 long cams, it's 4 cams in a typical dual overhead cam engine. Lots of other parts and components needed just to deal with it. And oftentimes they're heavier than an equivalent inline 4.
Yeah, there's going to be more material because, yeah, you know, you think about like an inline 4 is probably one of the cheapest engines to make. Honda, you know, we're seeing Honda doing a lot of parallel twins because they're even cheaper to make than an inline 4, right? They're just making 2 big giant pistons to get the same thing. And there's lots of advantages to that. But a parallel twin is an incredibly cost-effective engine to make. And we can see that when we go back to like your old Triumphs and BSAs and stuff like that. That's the first thing you made. A B-twin was really expensive because you had to make 2 of everything for the same reason. But I've heard other people say that a V4 has more power.
And intrinsically, it does not have more power, right? 1,000cc engine is 1,000cc engine. Now, they're not all created equal, right? Some people tune better. Some people have better fuel managements. There's all kinds of reasons why.
Valve overlap and valve size. There's like a billion factors.
A lot of design issues. Now, the argument I have heard for why a V4 should be more powerful is because in an inline 4, the 2 center cylinders tend to get hotter than the 2 outside cylinders. So now you're dealing with temperature changes. Well, you have the same problem, if not worse, on a V4.
Because your back pistons.
Because your back ones are stuffed in there and they're getting cooled, but not nearly as well as they could be if it had more exposure to other surface areas. So there's a lot of reasons why people say it behaves a certain way. One of them that I hear is, a V4 makes more torque. Well, again, it doesn't, in and of itself doesn't make more torque, but what they're probably referring to is the fact that a 90-degree V4, the firing order lends itself to a better spread of torque pulses, meaning when you get the hits of power as the crank rotates, your tire has a better chance of finding grip and translating that torque into actual movement and pushing you forward down the road. Whereas in inline 4, a typical Screamer engine has even firing orders. We talked about this last time. It tends to break traction and then keep spinning. It's hard for it to regain. But even when you do a cross plane, like they've done the R1, that helps. It does help it get closer to that big bang style, but it still doesn't have nearly the flexibility that a V4 would have. It's like a 90-degree in terms of the pulses that are getting to the tire. So a lot of times the V4, it isn't necessarily a torqueier engine by its very nature, but the way it feels to the rider can feel that way because you do get more of a kind of a grunt out of corners because it finds grip better.
Now, my personal observations, and this is not going to be scientific, having ridden all the things and owned all the things, that coming from like the V-twin multistrada to the V4 multistrada, the V-twin multistrada absolutely has more torque. But again, the things I've always found charming about an inline four is that a V-twin typically doesn't spin up quickly, right? You rev the engine, they rev
Two big
slower.
cylinders.
An inline four will rev rather quickly. And the V4, similar to the triple to a certain extent, seems to split the difference a little bit, where you seem to get a little bit of both. It'll rev far quicker than most V-twins will, but you do get that kind of more mid-range pull than a typical inline four will have. Even though on paper, right, a friend of mine years ago, he had an FC1 and I had I think it was a TLS or something like that. And he's like, oh, they say your TL has so much torque. And on paper, his FC1 had far more torque. But riding it back to back, it certainly didn't feel that way from a seat of the pants, even though the numbers, for sure, they made more torque. But how it delivered torque and how that sensory perception comes through, is very different.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of, and that's kind of the good thing, but also the maybe less enjoyable thing about motorsports is they don't really care how it feels to you. They don't care what feels fun to you. It's which one's going to set faster lap time. And so on like a numbers perspective, yeah, they look at it and they go, yeah, the torque is the torque. They don't care. But to the rider on the street or the guy who's buying a bike for himself to go ride, you do care. And I've ridden bikes. I had an old KTM, what was it, the 990 SMT. It was a big twin. It was a 75-degree twin, I think. It was a little odd. I loved it because it had this big, massive whack of torque in the middle of the power band, which was way more fun and had more character than just a very electric feeling flat torque curve. Now that flat torque curve is a faster race bike, most likely, because it's more predictable and easier to manage, but it's not as fun for a street rider.
Yeah, I have owned very few inline fours.
Yeah.
Almost all the bikes I've owned have been every other configuration, right? V-twins, 45-degree V-twins, 90-degree V-twins, triples, V4s, and I've only owned like one or two inline fours. And it's for that very reason. It's these other engine configurations I find to be more visceral, more tactile, more organic, maybe.
Some more character.
Yeah, and like I rode your R6 was one of the most phenomenal R6s the world had ever seen. That thing was absolutely insane. I didn't find it fun to ride.
No,
like it was.
No, and I guess that's a great point, because if you buy a bike because you want to go racing, you don't really buy it because it's a fun bike. You buy it because it performs well. It does all the things you need it to do. In fact, the best race bikes typically are the ones you kind of forget about, right? If you're there on track and you're trying to go as fast as you can, you don't want to think about the torque delivery. You don't want to think about the handling. It should just be transparent so you can focus. But those tend to not be the most exciting bikes to just own and go for a Sunday ride. And you kind of want something with a little more character than that.
Yeah, I got the question more than once with my Pikes Peak, the V4 Pikes Peak. Why did I not get the BMW XR? And I'll tell you flat out, I think the BMW XR is probably in a lot of ways the better motorcycle, but it was a lot less fun to ride.
Like on spec sheets, it's probably
even riding it was quicker. It handled a little bit better. Like it was objectively the better motorcycle.
Maybe has a better quick shifter than your.
Yeah, the quick shifter on the Ducati I don't find to be especially great. But I thought the Ducati was just significantly more fun to ride. It was, the X factor kind of a thing. So it's frustrating, like what you say in motorsport, when people argue, well, this is the best motorcycle. Well, maybe it's the best for you. It's best for your use case, right? And even reviewing motorcycles, people go, well, you got to find something terrible about this motorcycle. And I'm like, there may not be something terrible about the motorcycle. It may not be the motorcycle for me, but that doesn't make it a terrible motorcycle, right? And so a lot of things is it what it's trying to be is more how I like to grade these things. The BMW S1000R, I don't really love them. Mm-hmm. Is it good at what it's trying to be? Hands down, right? It's a phenomenal motorcycle. you know, and just because it's not what I like in a motorcycle doesn't make it a bad motorcycle.
It's also interesting because it's kind of like this with modern cars too. I'd say there's a lot of modern cars that are hard to love, but nobody really makes a bad one anymore.
Right.
Does anybody make a bad motorcycle anymore?
You know,
I mean, you'd have to dig pretty hard mentally to think of one that is like, that's genuinely a bad motorcycle. No one should buy.
I think there's, you know, I had that RC 390. It had some problems. There were some things about that 390 that were, you know, I was able to work around all of them, but how it was assembled, like a lot of the bolts were cross-threaded from the factory, you know, and maybe mine was one of the first. They came out of the India factory. I don't know. I don't know how some of these Chinese manufacturers, like if there's just like little quality issues, but I think from an overall package, that 390 handled beautifully. It was incredible that a 390 single cylinder thumper could do what that thing did. So bad then becomes, you know, is it a bad package? Is it a bad design? Or is it a build quality issue?
The build quality one's interesting. There are definitely still, especially newer brands that are coming out that are probably not quite up to par yet. But I've got confidence that they're going to get there.
So do I.
You know, I think like a CF Moto that'll be a brand that in 20 years we look back and go, oh, that's the bike that everybody buys now because that brand has come in and, you know.
Well, there's a couple CF Motos that are out there at every track day. Right, we're gonna call out Zoe. She goes out there, she flogs that thing, and I don't think it's missed a beat as far as I know. Like right?
Yeah, So I just don't think anybody's making a truly bad bike at this point. There's probably some that are just better at your needs or your application than others. But even then, to your point of the XR1000 versus your Multistrada, even though some of them, this one may be the better one, it's probably still not the right one. Right? Because doesn't have the character you want, doesn't have the looks, and that's, you know, all these subjective pieces. Those are far more important, I think, we give them credit for sometimes.
Right. I always say often that, you know, buying a motorcycle, you have to listen to your heart. You have to kind of trust your gut. Which one do you just like looking at? Because if it's a motorcycle that you're just like into, like we're sitting here looking at the trans out behind you, I think this is objectively, it's a good looking motorcycle. I like looking at it. And if that's a motorcycle, you'll deal with the things that aren't perfect if you like the other things about it more.
Yep.
If it's a motorcycle that you're mediocre on and you get it because it has 3 more horsepower than the other one, but then the foot pegs are in a position that hurt your knees and you don't like looking at it, or you'll stop riding. And I think it's more important to buy something that you do have an emotional connection to. You'll keep it longer. At least for me, that's been my experience. When I really just step things aside and go, okay, I want a motorcycle to do this. I like this style. I want a tour or whatever. And I like these kind of things. And then you just get the one that just spins your wheels and gives you the fizz. I'll keep it far, far longer than when I try to make the practical decision.
Have you ever bought a bike that was absolutely the wrong bike for your purpose, but you just loved the bike?
Yeah. And it's probably the only bike I regret getting rid of. You rode it. It was a 1998 Ducati Super Sport that had a big bore kit, light and flywheel, velocity stack, like shortened velocity stacks, flat slide carburetors. It was, if you're not familiar, the thing was loud and shouty and ridiculous.
Dry clutch, right?
Dry clutch.
Yeah, I remember.
It was hateful and joyful every time you rode it. And I would just look at it, you know, and then you would ride it in like the first 3-4 minutes and you're like, this isn't style. I love it. 15 minutes later, you're like, I really need to get home because that's something that I can't eat. My ears are ringing, even with the earplugs. Yeah, and so they exist. So I kept it for a long time and I still miss it. No. And I guarantee you, if it was sitting in the garage right now, it would be like, I would rarely touch it because it was loud and shouty and obnoxious and fickle and all the things, but I loved it. What about you?
I was trying to think about this. I had and I've said this before, the only bike I regret selling And if I was going to buy it on the street bike, I'd buy another one of these types of bikes. Was the KTM 690 I had.
Oh, you'd let me ride that thing. That thing was so much fun. But it was the spy versus spy. Yeah, it was just goofy looking. I loved it though.
It was not pretty. It had, this was in '09, I think, something like that. It had the KTM. It was more dirt bike than street bike. You know, the way the bodywork mounted was hokey. The wiring was comical. It was like a my first wiring harness type project. You'd pull the headlight off and it was just a basket of like a crammer wires and wires just jammed in and then a cover shoved on top and then screws put in it. Starting me to work on it was like, oh God. There's all kinds of things like that about it. But the thing it was meant for, which was just ripping around town and being kind of a hooligan on it, it was brilliant at. And you could ride it. You could kind of get away with murder on it, and nobody looked twice at you because you look like some hick on a dirt bike. And nobody thinks about you at all. That was a really fun bike. I probably regret selling that one more than anything else. And if I got another one, I'd probably do something like that again. I've half thought about getting one of those. I'm blanking on the name. The Stark.
Oh yeah, right. Those things look silly.
And make a street bike out of it. I think that would be a riot.
It would be it's kind of surprising they don't. It's probably just the NHTSA to get it through all the testing. But I think like that's something I've always loved about KTM. They're a little bit eccentric. They really are half German and half Italian, right? Because there's a little bit of like passion eccentricity baked into them. And then there's a little bit of like German meticulousness baked into them. And you get this really great middle line. And it's no wonder they're so wildly popular. Like that RC8C, I really wish they made like an affordable, reasonable version of that. That would be that would tempt me to get rid of the Aprilia because those things are so cool. Right?
Supposedly they're releasing that RC 990 at some point. I think it got delayed with all their financial issues.
Oh, right. Yeah, we were seeing spy shots of that thing too. Yeah, and it looked basically, I have a friend who took the what is the Duke, the 890 Duke, and he built his own, he turned it into a sport bike, built his own bodywork kit, built his own fairing stay for the front of it. And the thing's insane. Like, it looks a little janky, right? But it's also, and I think that's what their RC990 is effectively. It's going to be a factory Duke turned into a superbike. And I would be totally good with that.
Yeah.
Right? It still shocks me that they're racing MotoGP and they don't, like even their SMT, their multi-strata competitor, is like so far behind everybody else's bike like that. And you're like, for your KTM, you're racing MotoGP, like the company makes no sense to me.
Well, and apparently it doesn't make financial sense to a lot of things right now. So, but I agree with you. I think from a brands that I love, KTM's pretty high on the list just because they've kind of got that, this is ridiculous and it doesn't make any sense. That's why we did it.
Yeah, and I love that about them. I agree. They're one of the, I'm always paying attention to what KTM's doing because they're always going to do something like,
that's not practical.
Well, like even their Duke, like their big Duke, their 1290 Duke, that thing is a monster. That thing is, it literally is the dictionary definition of maniacal. Yeah. It is crazy. And you're like, you can go to and go buy one. Just go get one. Just go get one. They're nuts. They're insane. And I love that.
Yeah.
It exists. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. I think in terms of brand, that's probably my favorite brand just for the audacity of this stuff that they do sometimes. So yeah, I think that's my favorite one.
Yeah. And then there's other brands that they're great brands but I just don't care. They're not doing anything that excites me. And I'm going to pick on Suzuki, and I think Suzuki's kind of like in financial struggles as well. They haven't really done anything in years where they used to be kind of one of the more exciting, more forward-thinking, progressive marks. And now every year it's just BNG, bold new graphics.
Yeah, it's really disappointing. Even they just unveiled their new Suzuki, their 1000 GSX-R 1000. And it's the same bodywork, it's the same chassis, it's the same swing arm. Like none of that stuff got to change. All it is some internal things that supposedly should make it deal with tuning a little better. So if you're tuning it to go race endurance racing or, whatever else, supposedly has a little bit higher potential. But to your average street rider, they're not gonna do all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. It's just disappointing to see it.
Well, and you look at the one new bike that Suzuki has put out in the last several years, and that's the GSXS, the 800. That thing, like people who own them love them. They are fantastic to ride. And it's like, come on, Suzuki, obviously you still have it in you. Like,
is it a twin?
So yes, it is a twin. The GSX 8S, which is probably the hardest name ever in motorcycling to say. You're never... The Jixus.
I want to assume that there's a translation issue, but they've been calling them Jixers for so long. I know that they know better.
And now there's Jixus, the Jixus 8. Yeah, and it's a cool bike.
Yeah, I know they race them and stuff too. So I think they've been around for a couple of years now, though. So yeah.
And then Kawasaki has their eccentricity too, right? The turbocharged, supercharged.
Oh, the H2?
Yeah, the H2. It doesn't even. It's not even Kawasaki's normal logo. It's Kawasaki Heavy Industries on the nose of it. And apparently, when they were struggling to get the impeller, they just went over to their aerospace division and said, help us make a... How would you make one of these? See, they're like, oh, we have one of these in a box. Here, try one of those or something. That's Kawasaki, right? Like, yeah. Kawasaki is another one of those brands that are just really interesting. And they're like, we're just going to do it because we want to or we don't. This is just a marketing exercise for us.
I think it kind of is for them. I think that they're, they sell ships and stuff. They're not, they're not here for motorcycles.
Submarines. Yeah. Submarines and Kawasaki, or remember the Bonneville knockoff, the W650. Yep. It looked more like a Triumph Bonneville than a Triumph Bonneville, except for it started and it ran and it didn't leak oil and it features, brake features. The other company that I really pay attention to is Royal Enfield. And I love that these things are, if you really want to go back to the past, if you are really nostalgic and you want to ride a motorcycle from yesteryear, you can with Royal Enfield. And I love that they're there for that. I think they're great. They're so cool.
Are they cool or are they just cool looking?
I have heart.
Would it be fun to ride one actually?
Yes, because they are what they are trying to be.
Yeah.
That's where I get irritated with motorcycles. Going back to like the reviewing motorcycles, I was on a press junket and I was talking with one of their journalists, and I was kind of making the same argument, right? That I don't think there's a bad motorcycle. And that if a motorcycle is true to what it is, right? And he's like, no, a motorcycle being good or bad is binary. It is or it isn't. And I was like, I couldn't disagree more, right? There might be things about it that could be improved. Every motorcycle has something that could be improved, but to just say this Transalp is either is or it isn't. And you're like, no, this is a terrible super bike, right? But it's a fantastic dual purpose motorcycle, right?
Probably an excellent little commuter.
Yeah.
I mean,
I get like the people who are truly talented in the dirt, what they're doing on these things blows my mind.
Yeah.
Right. So it's obviously capable. We were looking at it, before we started, and we're like, it's obviously built to a price point. Right.
Yeah.
But it's pretty gosh darn affordable. And so, being affordable and being built to a price point doesn't go into the binary good or bad. Right. I think this falls back into, you look at the brake lever, the shift lever, it's just a stamped piece of steel with the thing on it. You go look at a Ducati or a BMW and it's like this forged aluminum with shapes and fluting, and it was obviously some guy that was what he worked on and designed. It was designed by a guy, the brake lever. Yeah. So like good or bad, that's not a binary good or bad thing. It is what it is. Mm-hmm. And there's pros and cons for both of them, right?
Yeah, there's like an honesty to a bike like that. It just is what it is. It's just here to get you from A to B and not cost you thousands of dollars.
$1,000, like, especially like with a Honda or any of the Japanese brands, right? Like it's their reputation for axe heads wearing out faster is well-founded and proven over and over again, right? if you're like shopping the classifieds for a used motorcycle and you come across a Honda with 30,000 miles on it and you come across a Ducati with 30,000 miles on it, what's your first gut feeling?
Different stories, right?
Yeah. Right? Like, which one's more reliable?
Yeah, I think it's totally true.
Let us know what you thought. If you like our new home, if you like the new dedicated channel.
Yeah. I think this is better. People can find what they want where they want it.
Yeah, I think they can zero in on what they want, right? And I think that's YouTube really wants people to, they really want you to be honest with what you're getting, right? Nobody likes clickbait.
Yep.
Right? That you want to click on it and it's going to be what you hope it is. And so hopefully by naming it Can Chasers Podcast, you knew that this was a podcast before you clicked on it. So
awesome. See you next week.
All right. Cheers.